Hello and welcome. Is esports doomed to fail? Has the bubble finally arrived and popped on us? Are we doomed in this upcoming recession to suffer declining viewership, teams failing, publishers failing, esports failing? What is going to happen? Well, today, that is our topic of discussion, analyzing what is going to happen in our typical deep dive and comprehensive way. Welcome. I'm Devin Nash. I run an agency called Novo, which is a marketing agency that covers brands and creators on various platforms like Twitch and YouTube. We do marketing for them. And I also formerly ran Counterlogic Gaming. So I have a vested interest in esports, to say the least. And I definitely want to cover this topic today. I've heard many people going back and forth. This channel, you're here because you want analytical and deep dive comprehensive reports on certain subjects, as is related to gaming industry and marketing. And we are not going to disappoint. So strap in. It's time, friends. We're going to talk about esports. And I thought that a good way to start would just be covering some of the basics. We're going to go over a little bit of the history of esports. And first, we're going to go into how esports are monetized. So if you are a person who's interested in esports, you watch esports, or you are interested in joining into a career in esports, this is definitely a video for you. We're going to kind of go over some of the basics and kind of some of the history since 2014, 2015 of how esports came to be, because that's going to set the stage for what esports is now. And then we're going to cover, I think in this video, we're going to cover League of Legends, OWL, and fighting game community. I think those are the only ones we're going to cover. That's going to, all the other stuff, we're going to talk about the other stuff too, but those are the three main ones. The two big franchise leagues, and then some of the indie stuff and what's happening. Some other stuff like Call of Duty, CSGO, it's going to fall in there, but you can't, I can't do like a 7-hour video. There are going to have to be other videos on that kind of stuff. All right, let's go. Let's get excited. So how esports are monetized? Well, first of all, how are esports teams making money? Publishers is pretty obvious, right? They sell games, they sell in-game items, and there's some money from broadcasting rights, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and some money from, I don't know, sponsors? Question mark? Depends on, OWL, not so much, but League of Legends, yes. Okay. Teams, I think this is kind of the most interesting one. So teams have sponsors, they have merchandise, they have tournament wins, and they get revenue splits from franchise leagues. Okay, so sponsors usually account for about a third of the revenue of your average esports team. Merchandise usually accounts for about 2/3 of any good team. Tournament wins are usually so little that they don't actually register. They're about 10% of the total tournament win. And then usually 90% is split between players and coaches. This varies a little bit. Some esports teams actually don't even take any tournament wins, particularly the ones that are outside of stuff like League of Legends or OWL, where League of Legends, I think you're looking at like a $5 million prize pool these days. OWL actually came in a little bit less than that at like $4 million. They're still throwing around a lot of money. So that 10%, when you're going to look at like the cost of teams and such, doesn't really add up to a lot. Merchandise is going to be your biggest revenue driver on teams like 100 Thieves or teams that actually have a brand. Heaven forbid you have to build a brand. And that's where you're going to see a lot of money for teams. So that's kind of how these get. And then revenue splits in League of Legends, we'll just put this out here, is going to be, I believe 35% goes to players. 32.5% is split between teams and Riot, respectively. And you have 10 teams in the LCS, LEC, etc., LCK, etc. Okay. And then OWL is super simple. It's 50% to Activision because Activision needs its money. And then 50% to teams, but that's split between 20 teams or however like X teams are in the league. Not too sure like right now, so I don't want to say how many. I think it's 20. But you can see how this number quickly dilutes itself. Like, let's say you have a sponsorship for like $1 million. Okay, it might seem like a lot of money, but 50% of it, so $500,000, gets cut off the top right away. And then 50% goes to the rating teams. You split that by 20. Now all of a sudden you have $25,000 per team for a whole sponsorship of an entire league, right? It doesn't look too good. So that's how teams make money. But how did all this get started? What happened? So this is going to be some cool stuff that a lot of people don't know. So around 2015 and 2016, esports actually accounted for 25% of Twitch's total viewership. And that's a lot. There wasn't really a lot of serious competitors in the live streaming space at that time. So 25% was quite a bit for Twitch. These days, that is top 1% streamers that have that. And we're going to kind of talk about that in a little bit. But esports accounted for 25% of Twitch's total viewership. So Twitch said, okay, well, this is cool. Like, we want to invest in this as a vertical, want this to go up. So we are actually going to pay teams. And if you take a look at, and not only they pay teams, but in 2016, actually, Twitch actually took on a sales relationship with TSM and Cloud9, the two leading esports teams at the time. And in addition to a stipend to actually just like literally pay them to exist, along with other teams like Counterwatch Gaming and others, they literally paid teams to exist. They also took on sales relationships where they sold brand deals for them. So this is kind of interesting, right? They really took an active part in esports, and a lot of people don't realize that the real reason why esports was able to survive from like 2015 to 2017 was Twitch. At the time, the LCS wasn't doing franchising yet. There wasn't any revenue splits. There wasn't any like money coming in from the league. Like League of Legends just kept all the money, and CS:GO, I mean, Valve always takes all the money, or the publishers or the people that are making the tournaments, whatever, took all the money. So there wasn't really a lot of money left over for teams, and the only way that teams actually made any money was through sponsorships. Also at the time, this is when you had teams like TSM that had strong, at the time, where Liquid had strong content engines that were able to get fans to pay, and to some extent, sponsorships were worth more on those teams than others. But most teams were operating at a loss, and and player salaries were rising during this period. So Twitch actually used, through paid contracts, supported esports for this time, thinking that it was going to be a successful vertical. And they were right to some extent. Streamers ended up taking on the lion's share of viewership for the platform, but it was kind of a cool play while it happened, that a lot of people didn't realize that was actually like a big part of esports. So then what happened after that? Well, so teams got a lot of money from Twitch. I'm sure that I'm under some contract that I can't tell you how much, some NDA from a bazillion years ago, that they're going to come back and Amazon's going to send a SWAT team to my toilet if I tell you the amount. So we're going to skip that. But just trust me, it's a lot of money. They got a lot of money from Twitch. And then because of this, teams started to diversify into other esports. So you saw them pick up a lot of FGC. You saw them pick up like a CSGO team or so. And for a lot of people, for the initial teams, CSGO teams that got picked up were actually funded by LCS money that Twitch had paid originally the LCS teams. And that was the same, like going into Overwatch just before franchising, and a lot of other teams. Like basically, esports was able to expand on a team level because Twitch was sponsoring it. And then that's like all the way through 2016. At this point, because of this diversification, you've got more players, you've got more coaches, player development coaches, expenses, travel. At some point, for some teams, burn rate on travel was like $100,000 a month for like the larger teams, which is a lot, right? Because at this time, you have to understand, so we're talking about like 2016 here, right? Esports expands, more teams, more content engines, more content. Now, costs are going up. Okay, so costs are going up quite a bit. And all of a sudden, you start seeing that most of these esports teams are not profitable because they've gotten a lot of money from their Twitch contracts. They've diversified in such a sense that their expenses are going up, but their profit's not going up, or their revenue, screw profit, their revenue's not going up, even related to their profit or their company, because what's happening is sponsorships are not keeping up with the amount of money that it takes to run one of these teams. And that actually has remained true for the next 6 years. We're going to run into that problem even up till today, where sponsors are just not coming in anywhere close to the amount it takes to run a team. In fact, in this ecosystem in 2022, as of the time of this recording, sponsorships often don't pay for a single player's LCS salary, much less, so like an entire sponsorship of an entire team doesn't pay for a single player LCS salary. You're starting to see this problem just pop up in 2016. And so this kind of gets exacerbated when 2017, Riot comes along and says, hey, we're franchising. And then the teams go, what's that? And Riot says, you pay $10 million. And the teams are like, oh, shit. Wait, what? And why we got to do that? And this is a quote from from an article here. Riot Games selling the Echo Fox LCS slot, claiming that the LCS slots were 10 million each. That's I do know the real number. It was somewhere around there. I don't know if the real number is public, so I'm just going to say, let's say it's 10 million. Now teams are like, okay, well, we were already unable to afford things. Right now, our costs are going up. We can't keep up with sponsorships. What are we going to do? Well, you need investment, right? And who is going to invest? All right, so we've got to convince a bunch of people to put $10 million into our team, but we have no revenue. So we have to convince some people out there who have an absolute ridiculous metric ton of money, but don't need an ROI off of it. And they're like, let's go to VCs, venture capitalists, right? People that are traditionally looking for high returns on investment for their money within 2 to 5 years. Nope, like no VCs are going to invest in this. So where do you go? You go to sports teams, because sports teams are in 2017 are now looking at esports. They're seeing in baseball, basketball, NFL, soccer, football, European, they're seeing their audiences are aging up. Now you've got 40-year-olds, 45-year-olds, and now all of a sudden, all these hip 18 to 20-year-old kids are interested in these virtual games. Well, hey, I'm a multi-bazillionaire. I have tons of money from sports, and I also like the ego check that it gives me to own a sports team. My son will think I'm cool if I own an esports team, so I'm going to buy. So the majority of teams in 2017 and 2018 sold out to sports teams or owners of sports teams. Pretty much everyone in the LCS. So now you'll see like everyone from Golden Gardens, Team Dignitas, owned by the 76ers, CLG, owned by Madison Square Garden, right? Basically, these were the people that ended up buying the esports slots, not necessarily expecting a return on investment for a very long time, but thinking that they could aggregate those audiences from 18 to 20 to their user base and they could bring them in. Cool. So that was the end of that, right? Now we have a kind of huge problem, though, because these teams expect ROI eventually, right? And esports companies don't really scale like traditional companies in terms of product and more money over year. So now the companies are running at a huge deficit, right? So fast forward 2018, 2022. Around this time, 2018, OWL comes along, okay, OWL, which says, hey, NFL, we're doing an Overwatch League, and I will never forget, I think this was the first presentation of this was either at 2016 BlizzCon or 2017 BlizzCon. I was in the room with like the craft people, a bunch of NFL owners, and they got this presentation. And like shortly after that, there was this Morgan Stanley article. It was like this report that came out that said that Overwatch was going to have 8 tournaments a year with 18,000 people at each tournament. So for context, Madison Square Garden seats, I think, 14 to 18,000. And we filled that stadium like a few times for like LCS finals. OWL was, Activision was saying that these potential investors, that they anticipated that there was going to be 8 of those per year. 18,000 people were going to pay 25 bucks a ticket. And that was going to equal like $13 million in ticket sales. But in addition to that, they also said in that same report that like 50% of those people were going to buy digital goods. And they also attributed some kind of like value to each one of them, where they paid more in like merchandise or something, but the value per user went up like $4 or $5 or something. At the end of the day, every user was worth $30. Okay, so they manage it. So OWL, and this is like a really kind of cool story of history. You're going to start to see as I paint this picture how esports has kind of come together. OWL starts selling this to everybody. These like Morgan Stanley reports, and a bunch of people buy in. Like NFL believes this, a bunch of people believe this, and OWL basically sells all of its slots for like an average of like $12 to $14 million, an amazing amount of money. And they don't have any of the viewership to back it up, right? They don't have the player base, they don't have anything to back it up. So they're telling all these teams that they're going to make all this money, and then at the same time they're approaching Twitch, YouTube, other companies for what's called media rights and broadcasting rights. And this is one of the most important things to understand if you understand how esports works. Broadcasting rights means you have a right to broadcast exclusively our show on your platforms. That platform could be Twitch, could be YouTube. So in 2017, Twitch buys broadcasting rights from Activision for 2 years for $90 million. A Twitch employee, off record, will later say that this was the worst deal in the company's history. I would take issue with that. I think it was their $120 million investment into music, but that's neither here nor there. Let's actually do the math on that. So Overwatch during this time averaged 33,900 viewers or so, meaning that per viewer, Twitch paid, ready for this, $1,324 per viewer on Overwatch. Now listen, I mentioned before in the intro of this video, I run an agency. I sell advertising all the time. If I could sell an ad for $1,324 per viewer, I would be a very, very wealthy person. I don't know. I'd be an extremely wealthy person. That was an amazing rug pull that Activision managed to convince Twitch to do. And then in 2020, or I think this is like 2018 maybe, because 2020 they actually sold these rights to YouTube again for $160 million over 3 years, which puts you at $53 million a year or so. And that's currently going to end, I think, next year, at 2023. So broadcasting rights are the main way that any revenue has come at all out of esports, okay? And once you understand that, you understand an inherent problem. And that is that who will pay these broadcasting rights in the future? So Activision managed to go to Twitch and convince them to do the $90 million deal. Twitch is never going to do a deal like that again, right? They've said that publicly. They've said it privately. There was no ROI possible in $1,324. Like, just to put this in context, right? Overwatch is averaging 33,000 viewers. We can go over and see XQC stream right now, averaging 100,000 viewers. Okay, and it's just a guy screaming at bad Steam games. So you look at a kid that's like, you know, $1.25 that is 3 times the viewership of a multi-million-dollar produced league. And you don't even have to look at my stats and look at the numbers I just gave you. You can kind of figure out right there that that doesn't make much sense, right? So would you give XQC a deal to stream for 3 years for $53 million a year on a platform? Well, definitely not. Like, a deal for him would come in at like $10 million a year max, right? That would be like the highest possible thing I could imagine. Why? Well, these people are convincing the people that are buying these broadcasting rights that the value of a user is greater than the value of like someone that gets like 100K in XQC or an Aiden Ross. But that's not actually the case. Those viewers aren't worth any more than those viewers are, right? There isn't any inherent value in a viewer that watches Overwatch or watches League of Legends that is more valuable than any of those people. And now that YouTube and Twitch are starting to realize that, I do not think that YouTube will renew this deal. I do not think that Twitch will renew this deal for OWL. And I think that OWL is going to run into some serious problems, which we're going to talk about in the conclusion here. So a lot of people think that are going to, maybe some people are going to come in and say, but Devin, like the Chinese viewers are going up. There's so many more Chinese viewers in League of Legends. There's so many more Chinese viewers in OWL. Okay, hold on. All right. These foreign language viewers are way harder to evaluate. They don't seem to buy things. Half of them aren't real. And we can't quantify them in the same way that we can quantify what we would call a Group A or Group B impression, which would be somebody from Europe or somebody from USA, where you can equate that to a certain demographic. That person could be expected to buy a certain amount of digital goods or have basically what you would call an LTV or a lifetime value per customer. We can't assert that value on a Chinese person because their ecosystem is a Chinese viewer, because that ecosystem is much more enclosed. They like buy within their own ecosystem. Even the internet is like cut off from Group A and Group B territories. It's not the same quality of viewer. So for the purpose of this discussion, I don't really care about foreign viewership. Also, it's worth noting that this number, 85% of that viewership was English speaking anyway. So we're still dealing with like most of the English speaking audience just not watching Overwatch. Okay, and you can go troll my YouTube comment section into the deep darkness and find out the reason why people don't want to watch Overwatch. That is outside the scope of this video. Needless to say, it's just not good. So I just don't think like in my opinion, right? Like I just like Overwatch 2 is like basically the same game and just not very exciting to watch. But the numbers are there. It doesn't really speak to it. So that's OWL. We're gonna talk about the LCS next, and I wanna go through the teams, because what we're gonna do is we're gonna kind of jump to the teams, and then we're gonna jump to what's happening with Overwatch, what's happening with League of Legends, and the FGC. So pulling up this article here by Forbes, which arbitrarily put the valuation of these companies at these numbers. I have no idea how they got these numbers. I really don't. The only really good indication of a valuation. Let's talk about what a valuation is. Valuation is, we think your company is worth this much money. We, being Forbes or like whoever does this, or sometimes some third-party capital company that like says your company is worth this. Okay, so really the price of a company is worth what somebody will pay for it. Now, the best indication of what that price might be is if we have a public company. But we don't have any public companies, except that, as of the time of this recording, FaZe just went public. So the market thinks here that FaZe Clan is worth $778 million, down 11%. And that is the only public company trading in esports that we really can evaluate. The rest of these are private evaluations, assuming that like TSM goes for like half a million dollars. I take a lot of $500 million, excuse me. I take a lot of issue with these numbers, particularly the numbers of esports teams that do not have strong content engines. So we have to think about what is going to produce this valuation. The answer really goes back to the first part of the discussion, which is how teams make money. And as I mentioned before, it's sponsors, merchandise, tournament wins, and revenue splits. So revenue splits in OWL are kind of a meme. In fact, right now, Activision Blizzard is still owed up to $420 million. This is June 2022 by Overwatch and Call of Duty esports team. This is basically people that paid an upfront amount to be in the franchise league, and then they were like, "Oh, COVID's hard, and I have a cough, so I can't pay you the other $8 million." And Activision's like, "Okay, that makes sense, but you have to pay us someday." And then the teams are like, "Sure, buddy," and then they go away. And now comes 2022, and Activision's like, "Hey, where's that money?" And the game and the teams are like, "Well, your league sucks." And they're like, "Sure, but you still owe us it." And there it goes. So maybe payments get pushed back again. But right now, Activision hasn't seen the full amount of that money. OWL is a mess, no surprise. LCS has seen the full amount of that money up front, and LCS slots are actually still very valuable. LEC, this fits slot, just sold 80% stake for like $36 to $40 million. So very active economy. We're going to get into the LCS in just a minute. But they're doing fine in terms of the valuation of those. So back to the valuation of teams. Going back to the first part of this discussion, which is kind of how these are monetized, we are not seeing this valuation realized within sponsors. Sponsors are, to even get a sponsor paying $1 million to a team a year for a sponsorship is amazing, right? You'd find like your Corsairs or your HyperX or your Intel's very hard pressed to justify that, because how exactly is that going to return to them a return on investment? Is there going to be people who watch these teams who are going to buy $1 million of headsets for a year sponsorship? No, that's not going to happen. It's not even going to happen indirectly, where that third-party exposure is enough to justify those people hearing about the brand. The cost per user, either through acquisition or impression, is just too high. So it doesn't make much sense for sponsors to sponsor these teams. And for that reason, sponsorship revenue is declining across all esports teams. Now, add to that as we are going into a recession, one of the first things to get cut is advertising spend. On the agency level, we have seen about a 20% reduction in advertising spend. We estimate that over the course of 2022 and 2023, that is going to probably go up to about 50%, where brands are basically saying, okay, instead of laying people, I don't have any money, instead of laying people off, I'm going to cut my advertising and marketing spend. And that's not necessarily always the right answer, but it is what happens during any recession. So teams are going to feel that. So not too much money from there. Merchandise only really applies to teams with successful content engines. On this list, that's 100 Thieves, that's FaZe Clan, Cloud9 to some extent, Team Liquid, TSM to some extent. The Team Liquid and TSM have fallen off in the past 4 to 5 years in terms of their content engine. These used to be very strong teams in terms of their content, in terms of their storylines. They have not kept up with that, similar to Fnatic and I guess like Energy and like Genji and them didn't really ever have those storylines. So those storylines which lead to those successful merchandise sales are one of the main drivers of revenue. You see 100 Thieves, I think, is actually underpriced. I think 100 Thieves is absolutely worth more than TSM for a ton of reasons. And you've seen TSM actually laying off staff recently, right? TSM, as of June 15th, and 100 Thieves laid off about, I think, 20 people each or so. Might have been even more. And this is just a response to the ecosystem that I've been talking about, and the fact that these teams just even want to have like really great marketing divisions like 100 Thieves do, and FaZe just are not able to keep up with player salaries. They're not able to keep up with the expenses of running a team compared to the revenue share that they're getting out of these like LCS and OWL like sponsorships, right? Or sorry, publishers, and then them. The publishers are making tons of money because of their game sales, their in-game sales. They have so many other ways to monetize, but teams are making their share off of the leagues that they're in if they happen to be in a franchise league. And that is only, of 2018, I believe the average payout in the LCS was about $1 million. We can assume it's like 2.5 to 3 million now. Even that, you're seeing like a player like Jensen, right, on Cloud9, highest player salary. I believe so Team Liquid decided to extend the contract to Jensen for 3 years, a salary estimate of 4.2 million. You can see that a whole year of revenue returns for an entire team is not worth a single contract for one player. So how can these teams make this money, and where's this valuation coming from? Somebody that is going to buy this for $500 million, $500 million, better not be expecting their money back. But that said, there's a note, there's kind of like an asterisk, which is like people don't buy sports teams historically in traditional sports for the ROI, right? Now, it turns out that the NFL and NBA are set up where they're more of a true publisher, because publisher/team relationship. Nobody owns the football in NFL, right? That's just, you just buy one of those for $15, and then it's the aggregation of all of the teams that share all that revenue. But with this big publisher, you've got Activision taking 50% of everything. You've got the LCS taking 32% of everything. And not only that, you're also dependent on what kind of sponsors they can sell. And if you look at OWL over the past year, they haven't been able to sell anything. Blizzard sponsorships are in the crapper because of the massive controversies, because of COVID, because of declining viewership. They can't sell any sponsorships. Riot is still doing pretty well, as we'll get to in a minute, but it's hard, right? You've got to depend on them to do that. And then once they sell that slot for you, so like if they sell keyboards for you, right? You can't use your own sponsored keyboards in the LCS if that slot is handled for you. So that cuts you out of potential sponsorships, especially in OWL. LCS is a little bit leaning on that. Okay, so the valuations aren't going to be there, and the real reason why somebody is going to buy like an esports slot, and like why the LEC was able to sell that $36 to $40 million slot for that amount of money, when originally that investment was $10 million. So there's profit about $26 million for a few years, right? Like when Misfits bought into that, pretty good amount, right? It is happening because these are very exclusive slots, and these big sports teams want to have the prestige of being in it, and to some extent might still believe the hype of like 10 years from now, this is going to fill stadiums, even though I don't think there's any real evidence of that. I think that ultimately the big problem with esports and publishers is that, unlike baseball and NFL and NBA, where like the game is kind of solved, like no one's going to be like, we're going to add another team to basketball, we're going to put towers on the court, right? Like it's not going to happen. Like everybody gets it. And although the age, people are aging up, like the game is set, right? Whereas like League of Legends, if a phenomenal MOBA comes out from a publisher, and now all of a sudden everybody wants to play that, and and that hasn't happened yet, right? Like as of yet, the like League of Legends has dominated the MOBA space. If a fantastic one comes out, then maybe that starts competing for viewership. Maybe people just get bored of the LCS, or like the League Championship Series. That's all stuff that could possibly happen, right? You're very game dependent and publisher dependent. Maybe a publisher starts making bad decisions. We've never seen that happen, right? CDL, OWL, right? That's never happened before. Blizzard Activision always makes great decisions. Every game they make is great. I love Diablo Immortal, amazing game, right? No pay to win, not any of that at all. Yep. So you see, there's many more things that can go wrong in the esports ecosystem for these teams to start suffering, and by extension, for these games to kind of go out of fad. So I'm a little bit concerned about that, but I wanted, this is a really good segue into the how kind of each of these esports is doing. Closing the team segment of this, I would say that most of these teams are overvalued. I don't think if you put your money where your mouth is, they would actually sell for this amount of money to anybody besides like the sports billionaires, Saudi Arabian oil lords who like are looking for the prestige of this kind of thing. I recall like back when like Echo Fox like bought into the, it was very much like when Rick Fox bought into the league and looked for investors for it. It was very much a play because his son was really interested in League of Legends and like owning a sports team and getting involved in it was a passion for him because he wanted to improve that connection with his son. Now, Rick ended up being a phenomenal owner, and some really unfortunate stuff happened to Echo Fox that I literally can't discuss because every time I make a YouTube video about it, somebody requests that it gets taken down. So interestingly enough, there's a lot of history there that you can look into if you want to do some deep dive stuff. But Rick Fox was a pretty phenomenal owner for the time, and ended up that his passion like really uplifted that team. But that just gives you kind of an example that like there wasn't like an ROI expectation there. It's a lot of people that are kind of done with that section of their life, and they're not looking for those huge returns like venture capitalists are, not looking to increase the number of the scoreboard, and they're just looking for those prestige things. So you're going to still see prestige buys. You're going to still see people interested in those slots, particularly in the LCS. We're talking about OWL and such in the moment. And I think that's still going to happen. But right, not at this valuation. Right, I don't think you're going to see an entire team sell out where every share is bought for these kind of prices, and that's assuming that like the stakeholders in those teams are even going to sell for those rates, because a lot of them are diversified now. Like 100 Thieves has like a ton of different owners, everyone from like Drake, right, like owns like some portion of it. I think some massive amount of like diversified people within TSM and 100 Thieves and such. So even if you were to buy this like entire team all out by all the investors, I don't think it would come out to this. Not everybody would be willing to drop their shares because there's some prestige in owning things like we talked about. Cool. So that kind of closes up our team segment. And we are now 32 minutes into this video. That's pretty short for a Devin Nash video, but if you're still watching, you have now entered the secret call out section. All right. So if you are now in the secret call out section, let me know. Tell me that you've been watching the video this whole time in the comments below, and let me know if you're enjoying this whole take on esports. I just have a couple of things to say real quick, and that is you can check out my Discord. Discord.gg/Devin is a marketing community where we just kind of talk about stuff like this, and come join it and say hello. Also, if you really like stuff like this, you can check out my Patreon, patreon.com/Devin Nash. My Patreon is $5 right now, over 70 videos on it. Just totally custom videos. I teach business, I teach marketing, I teach about social media ecosystem stuff I notice in the agency world. It's $5 to enter, and you get over 70 videos and updates every week, as well as a bunch of aggregate posts and all kinds of stuff. It's really great value, and if you want to support this channel, that is the best way to do it, because I get the highest revenue split off that, the 92%. And that's it. I just appreciate you. Leave a comment if you're here that far, because that is the rare elite of you that are truly interested in these subjects. And now we're going to get into how esports is doing across each respective esport. Thank you, everybody. All right, League of Legends. Let's start with this. League of Legends and Riot Games. Riot Games is making a killing off of League of Legends and has diversified in some really interesting ways. They have a Netflix show called Arcane, which absolutely killed it. They have a great music group. I actually like have been. They're making tons of other games. They've been very successful in creating Valorant. They've been very successful in creating Teamfight Tactics. All of these games are putting up great numbers, and League of Legends itself, as of the time of this recording, has about 180 million active users, according to all the data I could find, which is pretty reliable. That's a lot of users. It's up from even just a couple of years ago, and they've survived COVID very well. And I think League of Legends is doing great. I think Riot Games is doing great. I think, to be honest with you, and all the stats I'm going to provide, as far as the esports bubble is concerned, it's not popping on Riot Games. I think Riot Games is doing phenomenal, actually. So let's take a look at some of the viewership stats and some of the stuff that's going on. There's a couple of concerning things we want to talk about. I think LCS in general, LEC in general, is pretty good. But let's talk about some concerning things. Double Lift recently banned from for saying league viewership is dying in a traditional Double Lift fashion. He's not wrong necessarily, because the LCS viewership, that's NA, right? LCS NA was 40,000 less viewers when compared to 2021. 2021 was kind of the height of the pandemic. People were stuck in their houses, so it kind of makes sense. Twitch viewership was like overall kind of declining along the same lines. This is sort of expected. Like, nobody's kind of surprised by this in the live streaming world that's like analyzing this stuff. Yes, you're going to get less users when people want to go outside, and if they're stuck in their house, all they're going to watch the LCS. That's kind of fine. But 40,000 less viewers does indicate there's a little bit less interest. I also, in like kind of like a long-term way, I worry about the storylines. I worry about the sort of history that in 2014, 2015, the history of teams was like rivalries. You could point to like CLG versus TSM, right? You could point to like Team Liquid. I think it's harder to do now, where the storylines of the players aren't being covered from a content perspective as well. I think that's driving less interest over. So I think that's one problem to worry about. Declining viewership, a little bit more of a problem. Mid-season invitational, though, that just happened, peaked at 2.1 million viewers and had an average of 4,800,000 viewers. So that's pretty great. You might look at that and say, okay, well, that's not that much, but just wait till I give you the Overwatch numbers. So I think Riot Games overall is probably correctly pricing their sponsorships, LCS, LEC, LCK, and is probably going to be the only successful, in quotations, franchise. I think teams are still struggling in the LCS, LEC, and LCK because player salaries are completely out of control. There is no universe where a player should be making $1 million a year in the L whatever S. Do not make any mistake. You can quote me on that. The valuation makes no sense. There is no return that player bringing in that kind of revenue or exposure or impressions. Even the most popular player in the LCS or LCK is not even close to a mid-tier broadcaster in terms of impressions. And the very reality that they have to compete so much, scrim so much, begets that they can't ever be that popular because they don't have time to stream, they don't have the time to cultivate those audiences. And for the most part, as we mentioned before, the teams aren't really doing it for them. So I don't see a universe where player salaries are sustainable. They have to go down. They can't keep raising like this. Teams will not be able to survive. It's what's going to happen on a high level is investors, basically VCs and bigger firms and sports teams that own these companies have to make the decision to put more money in as these companies bleed. And make no mistake, all of the companies on this list are not profitable. TSM claims some level of profitability, but I think if that were true, they were not laying off 20 staff. So barely any esports teams are profitable, and not only are they profitable, they're bleeding money like crazy, paying these player salaries. We're still talking Riot Games here, but this is also true in like OGL, and to some extent other communities. Well, CSGO, like particularly in Europe, salaries I think are pretty inflated. What's going to happen is that these investors are going to go back to what's called their LPs, it's called limited partners. These are people that really have the money. And what LPs are doing in this ecosystem of the recession is they're saying, you know what, we're going to hold on to it. We're not going to hand it out. So a recession, as we are in a global recession, is going to pull back these LPs and these venture capitalists and these big sports teams from giving more money to esports teams. As a result, esports salaries have to go down. Contracts can't be renewed at their current rates. It might be unsustainable depending on the balance sheet of these companies to pay out those contracts in full. And if that is the case, we are going to see potentially the collapse of some of these teams. Now, I'd be very curious to know what will happen if a team in the LCS collapses, the LEC collapses. I think Riot would probably prop them up. I think that's probably what would happen. Riot is extremely profitable, and I think that the cost of losing a team financially would not be worth the cost. And when I say the cost, I mean the financial cost. I mean like the spiritual cost of losing a team financially would not be worth it. I think they just pay the amount. Now, I can't say the same for OWL, but overall, those are like my concerns. I do think the player salaries are out of control. I think that's a sort of a systemic problem in esports, and we could make a whole video about player salaries, and we probably should, because I've just kind of touched on the subject here. But you can see like these are 45-minute videos minimum, right? And we're not even like we're scratching the surface of some of these problems. But overall, just like for the purpose of this video, the LCS is pretty healthy. I think sponsorships. I've been a part of some brand deals on the side of the LCS. I'm pretty happy with like what the sponsorships are being priced at. I think that the LCS has League of Legends itself has a very active user base, and despite some declining viewership, which is a little bit concerning, but not so much. League of Legends still has a very healthy future, and the spots that are within the LCS and the teams that are within the LCS are their spots at least. What they're going for and what they're buying in for are probably worth the price of admission. So I think Riot Games has the best overall future of any esports publisher right now. Let's talk about WL. I'm going to need a drink of my tea for this. So I told you that mid-season invitational for League of Legends got 2.1 million viewers, peaked at 2. Mid-season madness, which just happened for OWL, had 37,700 average viewers, and it peaked at 70,000. That's on the esports charts here. You can see the results here: 70,000 with just 5.7 million hours watched. So that's for. Let's just go to Solinome, and we'll go pull up XQC. So that's 5.7 million hours watched. And if I pull up 7 days a week of XQC streams, he's almost got that right there, right? So he's clocking about almost 1 million a day hours watched, right? So another way to say 5 XQC streams equals one of Overwatch's biggest tournaments. 70,000 viewers. Remember, I gave you the stat up here that averaging 33,000 viewers means that Twitch paid about 1.3 thousand per viewer. So the fact that this was 37,000 average viewers, and this is a $53 million contract, means that YouTube, for those broadcasting rights, is paying even more per viewer. No way is this sustainable. OWL is in serious trouble. Add on to that there is basically no sponsors for 2022. Originally, there were some reports that like Intel, HP Omen invested like anywhere between like 1 and 10 million into OWL as sponsors and did not renew their contracts. Coca-Cola, which notably Bobby Kotick, the owner of Activision, president, is on the board of. Coca-Cola even pulled out of their sponsorship of OWL. So the guy that's on the board of the company can't even get them to sponsor it. And that was largely due to just the controversy that's been around Blizzard in recent history. And there has been a lot of controversy. So, pandemic, controversy, and also Al just question marks, right? Like, there's so many problems. I'll let the YouTube comments fill you in. We could do a whole video on Al. And if you really want to see one, you should tell me about it. I'll make one. But needless to say, OWL has just had endless amounts of problems, endless amounts of mismanagement. And they really haven't followed Riot Games. You know, to quote Kingdom of Heaven, if were you not close enough to a great king that you could live by their example? Apparently not. OWL is just suffering. I do not see a future for Overwatch. I don't see a future for Blizzard in esports. I don't see how it makes sense. They have tanked every esport that they have tried to make. They've tanked Hearthstone. They tanked WoW. They tanked Heroes of the Storm. And now they're tanking Overwatch too. I just don't see it, man. I mean, if you see it, like, tell me in the comments if you think I'm wrong. But how does this make sense? All of these teams have paid $10 to $15 million for the privilege of being in a ecosystem that nobody watches. Okay, and by the way, these 37,000 viewers are mostly just collecting in-game rewards called tokens. They're just collecting tokens. They're just sitting there for drops, basically. There's a big video I have called "Are Drops Ruining Twitch?" that kind of explains how drop ecosystems artificially inflate viewership. But suffice to say that if you are there for a drop, you're not actually watching. You're just AFKing and going somewhere else and doing something. You don't really care about Overwatch. You just kind of play the game or you want the reward. And a lot of people that want the reward don't even play the game. They just want the reward because it's just that feeling of having that reward. So, you know, half or who knows how many of these viewers are not even real, right? They're just looking for in-game rewards, or they're embedded from some other website. They're propped up by somewhere else. They're propped up by the Overwatch client. which is like embedding. So like, man, this is like really like if that were 37,000 pure viewers, even it would still be vastly overpriced. You need like you would really need like 1 to 2 million concurrent viewers, right? Or at least like 500,000 like mid-season is putting up to like justify the price of this broadcasting rights contract that YouTube bought for Overwatch. It's nowhere close. Like there's just no way that this is going to happen. Now, I didn't cover CDL at all in this video, and it's just too much. Like I don't have the time in this video to do it. I wish I did, but like I can't be making, like Luton '09 level lore videos about esports for like 3 hours, right? We'll do CDL some other time. Suffice to say, I think it suffers from a lot of the same problems that OWL does, and I don't see a future for it. And so these are kind of the problems with OWL. So OWL is just I just don't see what direction it's going to go. I don't know how any of the teams ever make any money. I think we're going to see financial collapse of some of these teams as the recession starts to tighten up in the next year. And either they're going to try to pull out of the league, which is going to have some like questionable contractual stuff. I don't think that Activision would jump in and save them like Riot would. Riot, I think, is kind of more loyal to those teams, which is kind of a funny thing to consider if you follow the history of Riot games. But I think ultimately they would be. Where I just don't know what happens to OWL. And I don't know what happens to Blizzard in general. Like, to be frank, and just to, it's my YouTube video, so I can do what I want. I'm just so disappointed in Blizzard. Man, like, God, I'm one of those nerds that, like, Warcraft 3, 5,000 hours, early World of Warcraft, oof, right? Like, what has happened? Come on. Like, Diablo Immortal was just, I'm an avid Path of Exile player, so there's an inherent bias I have to tell you about, okay? I'm a big Path of Exile player. And when I saw Diablo Immortal, I was like, what are we doing, guys? It just seems like and Overwatch 2 also just like the same game. They literally just like did a different color scheme, right? And changed a couple of things, right? Like literally just like copy my homework and, turn it in type of like development. And this took years and years to do. So I just think Blizzard is in so much trouble. And there's great channels that cover this kind of stuff beyond the scope of what I do. You can like Belly something to like get an idea like every day of how Blizzard is screwing up. And that's enough on that. So let's talk about FGC, which in my opinion is what I'm most excited about. For people that have been following me for a while, I love FGC. FGC is super cool. FGC stands for Fighting Game Community. This covers games like Smash, Dragon Ball Fighter, Street Fighter, stuff like that. FGC is actually really healthy. FGC is doing great. Let me tell you why. Genesis 8 had, which is a Smash Ultimate tournament, had 169,000 peak viewers. Smash Summit 11 had 115,000. Another Smash game, which also has like Melee and Ultimate there. Double Down Ultimate had 110,000. Pound 2022 had 109,000, etc. There's a couple of tournaments in 2022 that have really been killing it. And what's great about, let's talk about a couple of things about FGC that reason why I get really excited. So number one, there isn't really any publisher that like sticks their claws into FGC the way they do into like League of Legends, Riot, or like OWL or like Blizzard Games or any kind of like AAA titles, right? Even like PUBG or things like that. There isn't the same level of like basically the publishers are like, yeah, you want to play our game, great. And if you're like Nintendo, you're like, yeah, that game, esports, that doesn't exist. We made a party game. Nobody watches this at all for esports, right? Smash, no. What? Everybody just plays that in their parties. Your parties. There's no competitive players. What? Where? Who? What? Shut up, okay? Like Nintendo, we're just happy that Nintendo hasn't like turned the Eye of Sauron and for some random reason that makes no sense just burned every YouTube video that's about like Smash combos, okay, on Lucario or something. Okay, like it's like here's my Ryu combo video where I'm gonna show you how to do 5 down kicks. Banned, okay, like that. Like we're just hoping Nintendo doesn't notice us in terms of Smash. In terms of like other publishers that I just don't care, so Street Fighter, Capcom, right, or like Dragon Ball Fighter, I just update the game and it's fine, and they're great fighters. There's a worthy note here to mention that there's a game that I am super excited about coming up in the FGC community called Multiverses. This is a Warner Brothers game that came out of nowhere, and it is a game that is incorporating many different Warner Brothers franchise characters into a fighting game. Some that are not from Warner Brothers, but most are owned by Warner Brothers. So you got everything from like Rick and Morty to like DC. So you have like Superman, Wonder Woman in that. And it is actually a phenomenal platform fighting game. I'm really surprised. I played it nonstop. I'm very excited to see what happens to this. It's going to be at EVO And so I'm really excited to see like what's going to happen with multiverses. It looks like the publishers are the game developers are super passionate. Definitely check out Multiverses. It's free to play on Steam. I'm not sponsored. I just think it's really cool, and and that's something I'm really excited about for the FGC community. I'm also excited about Smash Ultimate. I think that it has been very healthy on Twitch. Dragon Ball Fighter has been very healthy as well. They're great games for great reasons. But as I was mentioning before, publishers don't really put their claws into the FGC community as much as they do on other and FGC is like a very OG community of like and still has that feel when you go to like an Evo or you go to like a Genesis of like the players being right there. There's big hype. It's very easy for players to understand how to appreciate FGC, probably more so than any other esport. There's some that are kind of competitive, like CS:GO, pretty simple, right? There's 5-on-5, like the guys that shoot more guys, they win. But FGC, like you can like bring a friend to an FGC type community group and immediately sit down and like realize why it's hype, right? Like just the way that, especially like the platformers, like Ultimate, Multiverses, those type of games, you could just see like high percentages. Okay, people are flying around, everybody's like cheering. The community is still really great, and the price per player. This is one of the very few places in esports where I think the price for player is not oversaturated. And if you are building a esports team, you can actually make money by going and sponsoring FGC players, which is also awesome, right? Because there's tons of FGC players that just pay their own way and aren't sponsored by teams. You could pay someone like that $2,000 to $5,000 a month, right? Something reasonable plus travel costs. A lot of them just want travel costs, but you should pay them too, right? And then you could go get sponsors for those tournaments with these kind of viewership numbers, and you can make it, and it will make a lot more sense than trying to justify anything out of like OWL or anything there. And I actually think that it's possible, like if you're going to make like a relatively successful esports team, to do so in the fighting game community. And indeed, there are some teams that are noteworthy that have done this. So FGC is, I think, like where I'm most excited. I think it's the healthiest esport right now. I also don't think it really suffers from franchising, though. Now that you've got like someone like Warner Brothers in, it's kind of interesting to see what they'll do to support esports. And they've also hired some people that are full time for the esports division. So I'm very curious, like what their future vision of the game is. They could potentially make it pretty crazy, because that right now, the Multiverses is I think it's like 280, 300,000 people, maybe more, as of the time of this on Steam. But I think over the next like couple weeks, it's going to explode because people are playing it on Twitch. So a lot of people are getting. It basically is more successful in its first day than Brawlhalla was in his entire career. And I actually thought Brawlhalla was actually like a pretty great game. Still is. I played it like at an airport randomly a couple days ago. It was a lot of fun. So I'm really excited to see what happens there. But yeah, in general, the FGC community is healthy, and I think the price per players makes sense. They're not particularly overvalued, and the viewership makes sense, and it's really easy to get into. And I think it's going to grow across YouTube and Twitch over the next few years. So I'm excited about that. I think they'll probably get hit the least out of the recession. And the real thing that hurt FGC over the course of the past year was that because FGC is so local, many of the fighting game tournaments are like localized, like just kind of like small tournaments like that all got completely knocked out and people couldn't see each other. But with the pandemic easing a little bit, we're already seeing TwitchCon come back. We're seeing Evo come back. We're seeing all these like tournaments come back. I think that will abate over the next like couple of years as the pandemic kind of starts to subside. Cool. So, geez, 52 minutes. That's good. That's a good Devin Nash video. What are the kind of conclusions here? I think that in terms of franchise leagues, Riot is still leading the way. They're really leading the way in terms of everything. Just their diversification of different types of content, mentioning the Netflix series, mentioning kind of the other games they're making. Riot is strong. There's a lot to talk about with like Valorant. Again, we just didn't have time to do it in the scope of this talk. OWL is a complete mess, along with Blizzard. FGC looking pretty healthy, and teams still have a lot to worry about. I don't think their valuations are justified. I do think they're going to have to be very careful in what contracts they take over the next few years. They're going to have to tighten their belts a lot. But the esports bubble is overall, which is kind of the topic of this whole thing. Is there an esports bubble? Is the whole thing going to pop? Well, if you've followed the length of this video, you've seen that like esports can't really be described in the context of a single bubble or a single industry, really. Like something like OWL and CDL are like totally different from like Riot Games. They can't even be considered the same industry almost, right? It's like when you jump out of a game category like MOBA or FPS, like CS:GO, MOBA, they all kind of fall under the umbrella of esports, but they don't really like follow the same ecosystem. Really different. And so I would rather make a more comprehensive video to kind of give you a whole picture, because I don't think like esports as an industry at this point in 2022 can fail. I don't think like it's just like the whole industry comes crashing down, everybody pulls out. Like it's got viewership, it's got people that are interested in it, and there will always be a kind of gamer that competes and wants to compete for games like this. So I don't think that esports is going to like fail, in the sense that when we looked at the very early days, it was possible that like with one franchise league, if Riot like just like the legs got cut out from under Riot, that the entirety of the thing could collapse. I think we're always going to see healthy numbers be put up in the fighting game community. I think we're always going to see pretty healthy numbers come up from like grassroots esports and like Rocket League, like stuff like smaller stuff like PUBG doing okay, like relative to their respective sectors. The major ones, though, I think Riot's going to steam ahead, and Blizzard is just go. If you want to like look at the real esports bubble, I think it's OWL and CDL. The real esports bubble, the real failure is going to be Blizzard. I think that's going to go down as the as the worst esports decisions and the worst esports kind of like situation, whatever you would call it, that part of the industry. And I think that is going to affect the price of future broadcast rights, as people that buy these sort of things finally realize that they shouldn't be paying like $1,000 per viewer. So if there is an esports bubble that's going to pop, it's definitely there. It's definitely in Blizzard. And they've done everything possible to deserve it. Now, can Blizzard turn it around? I see no indication right now that that's going to be the case. A lot of people point to the Microsoft acquisition. We covered that in an earlier video, I think a few videos ago. And it's worth noting that Microsoft isn't touching anything with Blizzard until 2024. So like not a single thing in the company is changing, including the CEO, which is really the thing that should change, right? It can be argued that in the long term, when Blizzard finally gets under MGS, Microsoft Game Studios, which has had like a pretty good history of making stuff, like Age of Empires 4 was fine. No like really big problems with that, had a consistent development cycle. There could be some fixes coming, but that is like a lot of people think like the upcoming Microsoft acquisition. It really isn't upcoming, right? Like OWL and CDL have plenty of time to completely fail, collapse in on themselves, and explode in the next 2 years, because Microsoft is not touching Activision until 2024. Keep that in mind. I don't think that Microsoft is going to be able to steer that ship around, and that is going to be a very long term. Like I'm thinking like maybe 5-10 years down the line, like we see a passable Blizzard game. And I think like that might be what happened. Like Microsoft has to come in there with like the scythe, and they have to just like get out of here. Like, well, what if we make Diablo 4 open world? No, get out. Okay, all right, you guys come in here. Like, what if we make it pay to win? No, that guy too. Like Microsoft just has to do a purge level culling of like 90% of the developers at Blizzard to make it even possible for a good game to come out, because it's just not happening. Okay, like just look at the history of the past 2 years. Not even close to like everything is monetization. Everything is just a mess. So that and that's assuming that Microsoft like has the wherewithal or the desire to do that. Like, and they're not acquiring Activision. The mysterious reason why Call of Duty just sells every year, every October and November over and over again, you know, some $50 million in revenue, which nobody can figure out, even though it's the same game. You guys are buying the same game over and over again. Matter. Okay. All right. That's my rant on esports. Thanks for coming out. Hey, follow the YouTube channel. Subscribe if you like 57-minute videos about esports. This is the YouTube Redemption arc. We're going to have some more videos too. Again, go check out the Discord server or the Patreon if you're interested in these videos, and let me know what you think. I really appreciate your time. Thank you for coming out for this, and I hope this was useful to somebody. Thanks, everybody. See you again soon. Bye.